Katrina Prescott stood at her washing line, hanging bed sheets in the relentless Wyoming sun, when she heard the familiar whispers that cut deeper than any knife. The year was 1875, and in the small frontier town of Riversbend, an empty cradle in a woman's home was considered a fate worse than death itself. "Poor barren thing," Mrs. Holloway muttered to Mrs. Fleming as they passed Katrina's modest homestead, their voices intentionally carrying on the prairie wind. 3 years married and not a single child to show for it. Katrina's fingers tightened around the wooden clothespin. At 26, she'd grown accustomed to the whispers, but familiarity never dulled their sting. Her husband Thomas had died in a mining accident 18 months prior, leaving her with a small plot of land, a struggling vegetable garden, and a home that felt cavernously empty without the children they desperately wanted. The town's judgment was swift and merciless. A woman without children, especially a widow, was an oddity, a curiosity to be dissected over teacups and church pews. Some called it God's punishment, others suggested more sinister reasons. All agreed it was a tragedy of the highest order. Katrina finished hanging the last sheet, her honey blonde hair escaping its tight bun as she straightened her simple cotton dress. The distant sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the dusty road leading to her property. A lone rider approached, his silhouette unfamiliar against the setting sun. Katrina shielded her eyes, watching as the man guided his chestnut mare toward her gate. He sat tall in the saddle, shoulders broad beneath a worn leather vest, dark hat pulled low over his face. "Afternoon, madam," he called, his voice deep and resonant. "Isaac Zimmerman. I'm looking for work." Katrina studied the stranger. His dark hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. His eyes, startlingly blue against his sun-bronzed skin, met hers with surprising gentleness. "I don't have work to offer, Mr. Zimmerman," she replied, gathering her empty laundry basket. "As you can see, it's just me here." He dismounted with fluid grace, one hand resting on his saddle horn. "I can see that, madam, and I can also see that your barn roof is sagging something fierce. Your fence line's got more gaps than pickets, and that porch step is about to give way." Katrina felt heat rise in her cheeks. Since Thomas died, keeping up with repairs had proven impossible. "I can pay you a fair wage for honest work," the stranger continued. "Been riding with cattle drives for years, but I'm looking to put down roots. I'm handy with tools, good with animals, and I don't cause trouble." Something in his steady gaze made Katrina pause. It had been so long since anyone had offered help without pity in their eyes. "I have a small room above the barn," she found herself saying. "It's not much, but it's shelter. I can provide meals and a modest wage." A smile transformed his weathered face. "That's more than fair, Mrs. Prescott." Katrina Prescott. "Mrs. Prescott," he nodded respectfully. "I'm obliged." As Isaac led his horse toward the barn, Katrina couldn't help but notice Mrs. Holloway and Mrs. Fleming had stopped their progress down the road, openly staring at the exchange. By supper time, the entire town would be buzzing with news of Katrina Prescott taking in a strange man. Let them talk, she thought, squaring her shoulders. They would anyway. That evening, Katrina served a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and coffee in her kitchen. Isaac ate with appreciation but not desperation, suggesting he wasn't one of those drifters who worked just long enough for a meal before disappearing. "What brings you to Riversbend, Mr. Zimmerman?" Katrina asked, pouring more coffee into his cup. "Call me Isaac, please." He cradled the steaming mug between calloused hands. I was born in Texas, raised on a cattle ranch until I was 16. Been working drives ever since, all the way from Mexico to Montana. Last outfit I rode with sold their herd in Cheyenne. Figured it was time to stop following somebody else's cows. And you chose Riversbend? Katrina couldn't hide her skepticism. Their town was little more than a whistle stop on the Union Pacific line. A ghost of a smile played across his lips. Seems as good a place as any, quiet, peaceful, and apparently in need of a man who can fix a barn roof. Later, as Katrina washed the dishes, she heard the creak of the porch door opening behind her. "Thought you might want these," Isaac said, extending his hand. In his palm lay 3 perfect eggs. "Your hens were hiding them behind that broken crate in the corner of the coop. Might be why your egg count's been down." Such a simple thing, those eggs. Yet Katrina felt an unexpected surge of emotion at this small act of thoughtfulness. "Thank you," she managed, taking them carefully. "I'll start on that roof tomorrow, if that suits you," he said, then bid her good night. Alone in her bedroom, Katrina stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of movement in the barn. It had been so long since another human presence had occupied her property that even these distant noises brought comfort. She fell asleep, wondering what the town would say when they saw the mysterious cowboy working on her land. The answer came swiftly the next morning when Reverend Porter's wife appeared on her doorstep, a pie in hand and curiosity burning in her eyes. "Just thought I'd welcome your guest to our community," Mrs. Porter said, craning her neck to peer around Katrina's shoulder toward the barn, where Isaac was already at work. "He's a hired hand, Mrs. Porter," Katrina said firmly. "Nothing more." "Of course, dear," the woman replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, though a widow living alone with a strange man might give rise to talk. "People will talk regardless," Katrina replied. "They always have." Mrs. Porter's expression hardened. "Yes, well, some might say the Lord works in mysterious ways. Perhaps this is his answer to your situation." The implication hung in the air between them. "Thank you for the pie," Katrina said, taking it with a tight smile. "I'm sure Mr. Zimmerman will appreciate your Christian charity." As she closed the door, she caught sight of Isaac on the barn roof, methodically replacing rotten shingles. The muscles in his arms flexed as he worked, his movements efficient and practiced. She found herself watching him longer than was proper. By midday, Katrina brought him water and a sandwich. He climbed down the ladder, removing his hat and wiping sweat from his brow with a bandana. "Much obliged," he said, accepting the meal. "Your barn's in worse shape than I thought. Previous owner didn't use proper roofing techniques." "That would be my husband," Katrina admitted. "Thomas tried, but carpentry wasn't his gift. He was a miner by trade." Isaac nodded, taking a drink of water. "I'm sorry for your loss." The simple sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Most people in town still approached her widowhood with either excessive pity or thinly veiled relief that it wasn't them. "It was 18 months ago," she said. "The silver mine collapsed. 6 men were lost." Must have been hard taking on this place alone. Katrina looked around at her modest homestead, the struggling garden, the peeling paint on the house, the broken fence line. "I manage." "That you do," Isaac agreed, finishing his sandwich. "But everyone needs help sometimes." When he returned to work, Katrina found herself lingering, watching the methodical way he moved across the roof. There was something reassuring about his presence, solid, dependable, without judgment. Over the following days, Isaac proved himself invaluable. He fixed the barn roof, repaired the chicken coop, mended fences, and reinforced the sagging porch. Each evening they would share a simple supper, their conversations growing more comfortable as they exchanged stories of their lives. Katrina learned that Isaac had lost his parents to fever when he was 15, leaving him to fend for himself on the vast Texas plains. He'd worked cattle drives, prospected for gold in California, and even spent a season breaking horses for the army. His life had been one of constant movement and solitude, not unlike her own isolation, though hers came while staying in one place. A week into his stay, Katrina visited the general store for supplies. The usual buzz of conversation died as she entered, replaced by pointed glances and whispers behind hands. Mr. Owens, the proprietor, greeted her with unusual warmth. "Mrs. Prescott, how are you finding your new help?" "Mr. Zimmerman is an excellent worker," she replied evenly, placing her list on the counter. "I'm sure he is," Mrs. Reynolds interjected from nearby. "Must be nice having a strong man around again, especially for a woman in your position." Katrina stiffened. "And what position is that, Mrs. Reynolds?" The older woman's smile was saccharine. "Why, a widow without family to support her, of course. What else could I mean?" Before Katrina could respond, the store door swung open and Isaac entered. The room fell silent as he removed his hat, nodding politely to the gathered townspeople. "Mrs. Prescott," he greeted her, then tipped his hat to the others. "Ladies, gentlemen." "Mr. Zimmerman," Mr. Owens said, recovering first. "What brings you to town?" Mrs. Prescott mentioned needing supplies. Thought I'd offer to help carry them back. His eyes scanned the faces watching them. Unless that would be an imposition. There was something protective in the way he positioned himself slightly ahead of Katrina, his broad shoulders creating a barrier between her and the curious onlookers. "Not at all," Katrina said, grateful for his presence. "I was just giving Mr. Owens my list." As they collected their supplies, Katrina was acutely aware of the speculative glances following their every move. When they stepped outside, packages in hand, she exhaled deeply. "Thank you," she said quietly. "They can be difficult." Isaac nodded, his expression unreadable. Small towns have long memories and short imaginations. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached the edge of town. There, Mrs. Holloway and her daughter Eleanor stood in conversation with the town's most eligible bachelor, Dr. James Wilson. "Mrs. Prescott," Dr. Wilson called, his handsome face lighting with a practiced smile. "What a pleasure to see you in town." "Dr. Wilson," Katrina nodded politely. Since Thomas's death, the doctor had made several overtures that, while never improper, carried an undercurrent of expectation. "And this must be your hired man," the doctor continued, extending his hand to Isaac. "Wilson, town physician." "Zimmerman," Isaac replied, shifting his packages to shake the offered hand. Mrs. Holloway's eyes narrowed with calculation. "Mr. Zimmerman, have you met Eleanor? She's quite accomplished, plays the piano beautifully, and makes the finest apple preserves in the county." Eleanor, a pretty girl of 19 with golden curls and downcast eyes, blushed furiously. "Madam," Isaac acknowledged with a respectful nod to Eleanor, but didn't pursue the introduction further. "Mrs. Prescott, we should probably get these supplies back before the ice melts." As they continued down the road, Katrina couldn't help but smile at the confusion on Mrs. Holloway's face. The woman had 3 unmarried daughters and considered any unattached man fair game. "You've disappointed Mrs. Holloway," Katrina teased gently. Eleanor is considered quite a catch. Isaac adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. I'm sure she's a lovely girl, but I've found matchmaking mothers rarely consider what their daughters actually want. They walked a few more paces before he added, Besides, I've never been one for playing the piano. His dry humor startled a laugh from Katrina, a sound so foreign to her own ears that she almost didn't recognize it as her own. That evening, as Isaac repaired a broken chair at her kitchen table, Katrina found herself studying him. There was something comforting about his presence, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the careful precision of his movements. The town thinks I've hired you for more than just repair work, she said abruptly, surprising herself with her boldness. Isaac's hands stilled momentarily before resuming their work. I gathered as much. Does that bother you? He looked up then, his blue eyes meeting hers directly. Does it bother you? Katrina considered this. It should. But oddly, I find I care less about their opinions with each passing day. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That's probably healthy. They've always talked, she continued, feeling a strange need to explain. Even when Thomas was alive, we were married 3 years and had no children. The town considered it a personal failure, mine, specifically. Isaac set down his tools, giving her his full attention. Some things aren't meant to be rushed. Or meant to be at all, Katrina said softly. The doctor told me after a fever I had as a girl that children might be difficult. Thomas knew before we married. He said it didn't matter. She swallowed hard. But I saw how he looked at other men's children. Isaac was quiet for a long moment. Some men measure their worth by the wrong things. And you, Mr. Zimmerman? What do you measure your worth by? His eyes, when they met hers, were steady. By whether I can sleep at night knowing I've done right by the people who've trusted me. Later, lying in her bed, Katrina replayed their conversation. There was something about Isaac Zimmerman that made her feel seen for the first time since Thomas died, perhaps even before. He looked at her not as a pitiable widow or a barren woman, but simply as herself. The thought both comforted and unsettled her. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Katrina was weeding her vegetable garden when the Thompson wagon pulled up, carrying Abigail Thompson and her 5 children. Abigail was a harried woman with perpetually uncombed hair and an air of barely contained chaos. Her husband ran the livery stable in town, leaving her to manage their brood largely alone. Katrina, she called, waving frantically. I hope you don't mind us dropping by. The children were desperate for an outing, and I thought perhaps... Her eyes darted meaningfully toward the barn, where Isaac was visible, repairing a harness. Of course, Katrina said, brushing dirt from her hands. Come in for some lemonade. The Thompson children, ranging from 2 to 10 years old, tumbled from the wagon like puppies, immediately racing toward Katrina's chicken coop with shrieks of delight. Children, mind Mrs. Prescott's animals, Abigail called ineffectually before lowering her voice. So, is it true? You've taken in a drifter? Katrina led her toward the house. Mr. Zimmerman is hardly a drifter. He's an experienced ranch hand looking to settle in the area. I needed repairs and he needed work. Abigail nodded, clearly unconvinced. Well, he's certainly caused a stir in town. Mrs. Porter is convinced you're living in sin, though Reverend Porter told her to mind her Christian charity. Mrs. Holloway is determined to marry him to Eleanor and Dr. Wilson. She trailed off meaningfully. What about Dr. Wilson? Katrina asked, despite herself. Abigail's eyes gleamed with the pleasure of delivering fresh gossip. He's been quite put out since your cowboy arrived. Told my Herbert that he'd had intentions toward you once a respectable mourning period had passed. Katrina nearly dropped the pitcher of lemonade she was carrying. That's ridiculous. Dr. Wilson has shown nothing but professional courtesy toward me. Men like the good doctor believe their intentions are obvious without declaration, Abigail said wisely. They expect women, especially widows, to be grateful for their attention. Before Katrina could respond, a chorus of excited squeals erupted from outside. Both women hurried to the porch to see Isaac surrounded by the Thompson children, who were watching in awe as he demonstrated how to properly throw a lasso. "Gentle now, Miss Emma," he was saying to the oldest girl. "It's all in the wrist. That's it. Now let it fly." The small rope circle sailed through the air, landing neatly around a fence post. Emma's face lit with triumph as her siblings cheered. "My turn! My turn!" clamored young Peter, jumping up and down. Isaac patiently adjusted the boy's grip, guiding his small hands through the motion. His face, usually guarded, was open and warm as he interacted with the children. "Well," Abigail murmured beside Katrina, "that's not what I expected from a rough cowboy." Something twisted in Katrina's chest as she watched Isaac kneel to help little Sarah, who couldn't have been more than 4, attempt a throw. His large hands gently encompassed the child's as he guided her through the motion, his face creasing with genuine pleasure at her delight. "He's good with them," Katrina said softly. Abigail shot her a knowing glance. "Yes, he certainly is." When the Thompson family finally departed 2 hours later, the children were reluctant to leave, extracting promises from Isaac that he would teach them more cowboy skills when they returned. "You're very patient with children," Katrina observed as they watched the wagon disappear down the road. Isaac shrugged, coiling the small practice lasso. "Children are easier than most adults. They say what they mean and mean what they say. They certainly took to you." Something like wistfulness crossed his face. "I've always liked children. Never had the chance to have any of my own, though." The casual admission hung between them, fraught with unspoken connections to Katrina's own situation. "I should get back to that harness," he said after a moment, tipping his hat before returning to the barn. Katrina stood watching him go, wondering why her heart felt suddenly too large for her chest. That night, a summer storm rolled in from the mountains. Katrina sat by her window, watching lightning illuminate the dramatic cloudscape. The rain came in sheets, drumming against the roof and streaming down the glass. Thunder boomed, rattling the panes. A sharp knock at the door startled her. She opened it to find Isaac standing on her porch, soaked to the skin. "Barn roof's holding fine," he reported, water dripping from his hat brim. "But there's a leak in the chicken coop. I've moved the hens to the barn stall for now." "Come inside before you catch your death," Katrina urged, stepping back to allow him entry. He hesitated. "I'm dripping wet, madam. And getting wetter by the second. Come in, please." Isaac stepped carefully into her kitchen, removing his hat and standing awkwardly on the mat, clearly conscious of the puddle forming at his feet. "Let me get you a towel and some of Thomas's clothes," Katrina said, hurrying to a trunk in the corner. "They might be a bit small for you, but they're dry." She returned with the items, then busied herself making coffee while Isaac disappeared behind the kitchen screen to change. When he emerged, Thomas's flannel shirt strained across his broader shoulders and the pants ended well above his ankles, but at least he was dry. "Thank you," he said, accepting the steaming mug she offered. "Storm caught me by surprise." They sat at the kitchen table, listening to the rain pounding on the roof. Thunder crashed again, closer this time, and the lamps flickered. "I've always loved storms," Katrina admitted. "Thomas thought it strange. He said they made him feel small and powerless." "I can understand both views," Isaac replied, warming his hands around the mug. "There's beauty in their wildness, but also humbling force." Another flash of lightning illuminated the kitchen, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. The lamps went out, plunging them into darkness. "Stay put," Isaac said calmly. "I'll light the lantern." Katrina heard him moving carefully through the dark kitchen. A match struck, and then the soft glow of the oil lantern pushed back the shadows, revealing Isaac's face in warm light. "There," he said, setting the lantern on the table between them. "Better?" In the intimate circle of lamplight, with rain lashing the windows and thunder rumbling overhead, Katrina was suddenly, acutely aware of how alone they were, how long it had been since she'd sat across from a man in the quiet of her kitchen after dark. "Yes," she said softly. "Better." Isaac's eyes met hers across the table, and something electric passed between them, a current as palpable as the lightning outside. For a breathless moment, Katrina thought he might reach for her hand. Instead, he cleared his throat and looked away. "I should check on the animals once more before turning in," he said, rising from the table. "Of course," Katrina replied, trying to hide her disappointment. "Take the lantern. I have candles." As she watched him disappear into the storm, lantern light bobbing toward the barn, Katrina pressed a hand to her chest, where her heart beat a traitorous rhythm. This attraction to Isaac was unexpected and complicated, and likely one-sided. He was her employee, nothing more. Yet as she prepared for bed by candlelight, she couldn't help remembering the gentleness in his eyes when he spoke to the Thompson children, or the quiet strength in his hands as he worked. For the first time since Thomas died, Katrina found herself thinking of a future that wasn't just about survival. The thought terrified her. The next morning dawned clear and fresh, the storm having washed the world clean. Katrina stepped onto her porch, breathing in the scent of rain-soaked earth and sun-warmed wood. In the yard, Isaac was already at work, repairing the chicken coop roof. He looked up as she appeared, raising a hand in greeting. "Morning," he called. "Coffee's hot in the kitchen. Made it before I came out." The small kindness touched her. "Thank you. Have you eaten?" "I'll grab something when I finish this section." Katrina nodded and went back inside, oddly disappointed by his businesslike manner. Had she imagined the moment between them during the storm? Perhaps it was for the best. Entanglements would only complicate their arrangement. She was frying bacon when she heard wagon wheels approaching. Looking out the window, she was surprised to see Dr. Wilson's buggy pulling up to her gate. The doctor himself, handsome in his Sunday best, despite it being Tuesday, stepped down and adjusted his waistcoat before approaching the house. Isaac paused in his work, watching the doctor's approach with an unreadable expression. "Mrs. Prescott," Dr. Wilson called, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. "I hope I'm not interrupting your morning." "Not at all, Doctor," Katrina replied, wiping her hands on her apron. "Is something wrong in town?" "Nothing of the sort." His smile was carefully practiced. "I was hoping to speak with you privately, if I might." Katrina glanced toward Isaac, who had returned to his work with deliberate focus. "Of course. Please, come in." Inside, she offered coffee, which the doctor declined. Instead, he perched on the edge of her sofa, hat balanced on his knee. "Mrs. Prescott, Katrina," he began, his tone softening. I've been meaning to call on you for some time. I've always admired your strength and dignity, especially after poor Thomas's passing." Katrina felt a flutter of unease at his familiar use of her first name. "That's kind of you to say, Doctor." "James, please." He leaned forward earnestly. "Katrina, I'll be direct. I believe we could suit each other very well. I offer financial security, social standing, and companionship. You would never need to struggle with this homestead again." Stunned by his abrupt proposal, Katrina stared at him. "Are you asking me to marry you, Dr. Wilson?" "I am." He smiled confidently. "I've given you appropriate time to mourn, but there's no reason for a young woman like yourself to continue alone, especially given your particular circumstances." Her particular circumstances. His delicate phrasing couldn't disguise his meaning her childlessness, which the town considered a defining tragedy. "Dr. Wilson, I'm flattered, but please consider carefully before refusing," he interrupted. "Your position is precarious. A widow alone. Taking in strange men, it raises eyebrows. As my wife, you would have respect, security, and perhaps even the family you've been denied." Heat rushed to Katrina's face, partly embarrassment, partly anger. "I appreciate your concern for my reputation, Doctor, but Mr. Zimmerman is an employee, nothing more." Dr. Wilson's expression grew patronizing. "My dear, intentions matter little in matters of propriety. Perception is reality. Besides," he added with a meaningful glance, "a drifter like Zimmerman will move on eventually. Men of his sort always do." Before Katrina could respond, a shadow fell across the doorway. Isaac stood there, his expression carefully neutral despite the tension evident in his jaw. "Pardon the interruption," he said stiffly. "Just needed to get the hammer from the kitchen drawer." Dr. Wilson rose, drawing himself up to his full height, which still left him several inches shorter than Isaac. "Zimmerman, convenient timing." Isaac's eyes flicked briefly to Katrina's face, reading something there that made his own expression harden. "Just doing my job, Doctor. Same as you." He retrieved the hammer and left without another word. An awkward silence filled the room in his wake. "You see," Dr. Wilson said quietly, "already there are complications I hadn't anticipated. I had hoped to court you properly, but perhaps speed is of the essence." Katrina squared her shoulders, finding her voice at last. "Dr. Wilson, while I'm genuinely touched by your offer, I must decline. I'm not ready to remarry, and when I am, I hope to do so for love rather than convenience or social standing." The doctor's face tightened with poorly concealed irritation. "Love is a luxury, Mrs. Prescott. Security and respectability are necessities, especially for a woman in your position." "My position is that of a property owner managing her own affairs," Katrina replied firmly. "I'm grateful for your interest, but my answer remains no." Dr. Wilson retrieved his hat, his manner cooling considerably. "I see. Well, should you reconsider, my offer stands, though I should warn you a reputation, once compromised, is difficult to restore." After he departed, Katrina stood trembling in her kitchen, anger and indignation coursing through her. The doctor's proposal had been less about affection and more about positioning, offering her the charity of his name to salvage her from perceived impropriety and barrenness. When she finally composed herself enough to step outside, she found Isaac mending the chicken coop with focused intensity, his movements sharp with barely contained energy. "I've finished the bacon," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Would you like some breakfast? Isaac looked up, his expression guarded. Don't want to intrude if you've got things to discuss with the doctor. Dr. Wilson has left, Katrina said firmly, and there was nothing to discuss. Something in her tone made Isaac pause. He set down his hammer, studying her face. Everything all right? The good doctor proposed marriage, Katrina said bluntly. As an act of charity toward my precarious position as a childless widow. Isaac's jaw tightened. What did you tell him? That I'd rather make my own way than marry without love. She lifted her chin defiantly. Was that foolish of me? A slow smile spread across Isaac's face, the first genuine one she'd seen from him. No, madam, I'd say that was exactly right. Over breakfast, they spoke of practical matters, repairs still needed, supplies to order, plans for the small vegetable garden. But something had shifted between them. A new understanding, perhaps, or the first fragile roots of trust. As Isaac rose to return to work, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, Mrs. Prescott, I think the doctor's a fool. Oh? Katrina raised an eyebrow. How so? Any man who sees your empty cradle as your defining feature is blind to everything else you are. The simple statement, delivered without flourish or expectation, left Katrina speechless as he returned to his work. That afternoon, Katrina decided to ride into town for supplies. Isaac insisted on accompanying her, citing the heavy bags of flour she intended to purchase. They traveled in companionable silence, the summer sun warm on their backs. As they approached the main street, they passed the town's small schoolhouse. Children were just being released, streaming out into the yard with shouts of freedom. Among them, Katrina spotted little Emma Thompson, who waved enthusiastically when she saw them. Mr. Zimmerman, the girl called, running toward them. Did you bring your rope? You promised to teach me the big loop. Isaac chuckled, dismounting to meet the excited child. Not today, Miss Emma. We're just in town for supplies, but next time you visit, I promise. Emma's face fell momentarily, then brightened. Will you at least show everyone the trick with the coin? Please. Isaac glanced at Katrina, who nodded encouragingly. Well, I suppose one quick trick wouldn't hurt. By now, several other children had gathered around, drawn by the prospect of entertainment. Isaac reached into his pocket and produced a silver dollar. Now, watch carefully, he instructed, holding the coin between his thumb and forefinger. With a deft movement, he seemed to pass it to his other hand, then opened both to show it had vanished. The children gasped in delight. Where did it go? Demanded a small boy. Isaac made a show of looking confused, then reached behind Emma's ear. Why, I believe you've been keeping it safe all along. The coin appeared as if by magic, eliciting squeals of amazement from the gathered children. Do it again, they chorused. Another time, Isaac promised. You should all get home before your parents worry. As the children dispersed, Katrina watched Isaac pocket the coin, a wistful expression briefly crossing his face. You're quite the performer, she observed as they continued toward the general store. He shrugged, a faint blush coloring his tanned cheeks. Just a few tricks I picked up from a gambler in Dodge City. Comes in handy when trail drives get monotonous. The children adore you. Children are easily impressed, he deflected, though she could tell he was pleased. Inside the general store, they found Mrs. Holloway and Eleanor examining fabric. The older woman's eyes lit with predatory interest as Isaac entered. Mr. Zimmerman, she exclaimed, what perfect timing. Eleanor was just saying she needed a man's opinion on this calico for a new dress. Eleanor blushed furiously, avoiding Isaac's eyes. I'm afraid I know little about ladies' fashion, madam, Isaac replied politely but firmly. Mrs. Prescott is the one with the good eye for color. Katrina hid her smile as she moved to the counter to place her order with Mr. Owens. From the corner of her eye, she saw Mrs. Holloway maneuver Eleanor closer to Isaac, who was examining a display of tools with determined focus. "Eleanor plays beautifully, you know," Mrs. Holloway was saying. "Perhaps you might come to supper one evening and hear her perform." Before Isaac could respond, the store door swung open and Reverend Porter entered, his normally genial face troubled. "Mrs. Prescott," he called, spotting Katrina at the counter. "Might I have a word?" Katrina exchanged a glance with Isaac, who straightened, suddenly alert. "Of course, Reverend," she replied. "Is something wrong?" The Reverend led her to a quiet corner of the store. Though in the small space, privacy was largely an illusion. "Mrs. Prescott, I speak to you now not as your spiritual advisor, but as a friend concerned for your welfare." Katrina's stomach tightened. "I appreciate your concern, Reverend, but I assure you I'm quite well." "It's your reputation I'm concerned about," he said, lowering his voice. "There has been talk, unfair talk, I'm sure, regarding your arrangement with Mr. Zimmerman." "Talk is hardly new to me, Reverend," Katrina replied evenly. "The town has been discussing my failings since long before Thomas died." The Reverend winced at her bluntness. Nevertheless, as a woman alone, appearances matter greatly. "Dr. Wilson has approached me with concerns." "Dr. Wilson should concern himself with his patients, not my personal affairs," Katrina interrupted, her patience thinning. "He speaks only out of care for you," the Reverend insisted. "He has indicated his intentions are honorable, and such a match would secure your position in the community." "With all due respect, Reverend, my position in the community is already secure. I own my property outright, manage my own affairs, and employ help as needed just as any male property owner would do without comment." The Reverend sighed heavily. "Katrina, you know it's not the same. A woman alone invites speculation, especially one who has been unable to fulfill the natural role of motherhood." The familiar pain twisted in Katrina's chest, but now it was accompanied by a surge of anger. "My worth is not determined by what my womb can or cannot do, Reverend, and I would hope that a man of God might be the first to acknowledge that." From across the store, Isaac appeared at her side, his presence solid and reassuring. "Everything all right here, Mrs. Prescott?" "Perfectly fine, thank you, Mr. Zimmerman," she replied, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "The Reverend was just sharing some community concerns with me." Isaac's gaze shifted to the Reverend, his expression respectful but unyielding. "I understand how appearances matter in a small town, Reverend. If it would ease minds, I'm happy to move my sleeping quarters to town and just ride out daily for work." Katrina turned to him in surprise. "That's not necessary." "Perhaps it would be wise," the Reverend suggested. "At least until—" "Until what?" Katrina challenged. "Until I agree to marry Dr. Wilson to silence the gossips. Until I sell my property and move somewhere my barrenness won't offend delicate sensibilities." A hush fell over the store as her voice rose. Mrs. Holloway and Eleanor watched wide-eyed while Mr. Owens pretended to arrange tins on a shelf. "Mrs. Prescott," the Reverend began, clearly flustered. "I've endured the whispers and pitying glances for years," Katrina continued, unable to stop now that the dam had broken. "I've been treated as less than whole because I couldn't give Thomas children. I've been judged for continuing to live in my home after his death. And now I'm being judged for hiring help to maintain the property he left me." She drew a shaky breath. "Well, I'm finished caring what this town thinks of me." With that, she turned to Mr. Owens. "I'll collect my order tomorrow, Mr. Owens. Good day." She swept out of the store, heart pounding, aware of the stunned silence in her wake. Outside, she untied her horse with trembling fingers, fighting back tears of anger and humiliation. Isaac appeared beside her, taking the reins gently from her hands. "Let me. I'm perfectly capable." "I know you are," he said quietly, "but right now your hands are shaking." Katrina relented, allowing him to help her mount. As they rode out of town, she kept her back straight and her eyes forward, refusing to acknowledge the curious faces watching from windows and doorways. When they were well clear of town, Isaac broke the silence. "That was quite a speech." "It was inappropriate and emotional," Katrina replied tightly. "Exactly what they expected from a hysterical woman." "Seemed like honest truth to me," Isaac said, "and long overdue." Katrina glanced at him, surprised by the admiration in his voice. "You don't think I made things worse?" "Some things need to get worse before they can get better." He adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. "For what it's worth, I think you're the strongest person in that town, man or woman." His simple vote of confidence loosened something in Katrina's chest. To her horror, tears began to spill down her cheeks, not of anger this time, but of release. Isaac pretended not to notice, giving her the dignity of privacy while keeping his horse close to hers, a silent guardian as she finally allowed herself to weep for all she had lost and all she had endured. By the time they reached her property, Katrina had composed herself. She dismounted without assistance, squaring her shoulders. "Thank you," she said simply. Isaac tipped his hat, understanding in his eyes. "No thanks needed." That evening, as they shared a quiet supper, Katrina found herself studying Isaac's face in the lamplight. The strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar beside his right eye, the way his dark hair curled slightly at his collar. In just a few weeks, his presence had become familiar, comforting. "I've been thinking," she said suddenly, "about what you offered in town." Isaac looked up from his plate. "About moving to town?" "Yes, it's not necessary." He set down his fork. The Reverend made some fair points about appearances. The Reverend, like everyone else in Riversbend, is more concerned with conformity than truth. Katrina met his gaze directly. "I won't have you inconvenienced because of small-minded gossip." Isaac studied her for a long moment. "It's not just about gossip, Katrina. It's about your standing in the community." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. "My standing," she repeated. "My standing was compromised the moment it became clear I couldn't give Thomas children. Nothing I do or don't do will change how they see me." Isaac's expression softened. "Is that what you believe? That your value to them, to anyone, depends on whether you can bear children?" The direct question, asked without pity or judgment, pierced Katrina's carefully constructed defenses. "Isn't that what society believes? A woman's primary purpose is motherhood. Without it, what am I?" "You're Katrina Prescott," Isaac said simply, "strong enough to maintain this homestead alone after losing your husband, kind enough to offer work to a stranger, brave enough to stand up to an entire town's judgment." He leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. "An empty cradle doesn't define you any more than my drifting past defines me." Katrina's throat tightened with emotion. "Most men want children, a legacy. It's only natural." "What's natural is wanting connection," Isaac replied. "Family comes in many forms." The conviction in his voice stirred something in Katrina, a cautious hope she'd long ago buried. "In any case," she said, regaining her composure, "I won't have you sleeping in town when there's a perfectly good room above my barn. The gossips can talk themselves hoarse for all I care." A smile tugged at Isaac's mouth. "Yes, madam." Later that night, unable to sleep, Katrina sat on her porch watching fireflies dance in the darkness. The summer air was heavy with the scent of wild roses and fresh-cut hay from neighboring farms. Footsteps on the path made her look up. Isaac approached from the barn, also apparently restless. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. "Too much on my mind," she admitted. "You?" "Same." He gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Mind some company?" "Please." He settled beside her, his large frame making the porch chair seem delicate in comparison. For a while they sat in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies and listening to the chorus of night insects. "I've been thinking," Isaac said finally, his voice low in the darkness, "about what happens when the repairs are done." Katrina's heart skipped. She'd been avoiding this very thought the inevitable day when Isaac would have no reason to stay. "There's always more work on a homestead," she said, aiming for lightness. "Fences break, roofs leak." "True enough." He turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "But I don't want to stay as just your hired hand, Katrina." Her pulse quickened. "What do you want, Isaac?" "A chance," he said simply. "To be more than just the man who fixes your barn. To see if what I feel growing between us might take root and flourish." Katrina's breath caught. "And what do you feel growing between us?" "Something I've never felt before." His voice was steady, but she could hear the vulnerability beneath it. "Something worth stopping for after a lifetime of moving on." He reached for her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I don't care what the town says about either of us. I care about who we are together." Katrina looked down at their joined hands, his large and work-roughened, hers smaller but equally marked by labor. Two people who had faced life's harshness alone, now considering the possibility of facing it together. "I'm afraid," she admitted softly, "of hoping again, of wanting things I might not be able to have." "What things, Katrina?" "A family. Love that lasts. Happiness that doesn't get snatched away." Isaac's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. "None of those things are guaranteed to anyone. All we can do is be brave enough to reach for them anyway." She met his gaze in the moonlight. "And if I can never give you children?" "Then we'll fill our lives with other kinds of joy," he said without hesitation. "A home doesn't need a cradle to be complete, Katrina. It just needs love." The simple truth of his words unlocked something in Katrina's heart, a chamber she'd sealed off after too much disappointment and grief. Tentatively, she reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I think," she whispered, "I'd like to be brave with you, Isaac Zimmerman." His smile was tender as he leaned forward, pausing just shy of her lips. "May I?" In answer, she closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. His arms encircled her gently, as if she were something precious, and Katrina allowed herself to melt against his solid strength. When they finally drew apart, breathless and wondering, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you hanging sheets in the sunlight." Katrina laughed softly. and I've been wanting you to since you fixed my porch step." They remained on the porch until the moon was high, talking of dreams long set aside and hopes newly rekindled. When Katrina finally rose to go inside, Isaac caught her hand. "Whatever comes," he promised, "we face it together." As summer turned to autumn, Katrina and Isaac settled into a new rhythm, no longer employer and employee, but partners in every sense. Isaac moved his few belongings from the barn loft to the main house, a development that set tongues wagging furiously in town. They married in October, a simple ceremony in Reverend Porter's church, with only Abigail Thompson and her husband as witnesses. The Reverend, to his credit, performed the service with genuine warmth, perhaps recognizing the authentic love between them that transcended the town's petty judgments. Dr. Wilson left Riversbend shortly after, accepting a position in Denver. Mrs. Holloway quickly redirected her matchmaking energies toward the new blacksmith's apprentice, and gradually, the scandal of Katrina and Isaac's unconventional courtship faded into acceptance, if not complete approval. Their first winter together brought challenges: heavy snow, frozen pipes, and lean times when game was scarce. But it also brought joy Katrina had never expected to find again: the comfort of Isaac's arms on cold nights, laughter over shared meals, and the gradual healing of old wounds as they built their life together. Spring arrived with renewal, both in the land and in their hearts. Isaac expanded the vegetable garden, built a new chicken coop, and began work on additional rooms for their modest house. When Katrina questioned the need for more space, he simply smiled and said, "A home should have room to grow." It was a warm May afternoon when Abigail Thompson arrived with her brood, including a new addition, a solemn-eyed girl of 6 named Ruth, recently orphaned when her parents' wagon overturned crossing a river. "The poor thing has no family left," Abigail explained as the child hid shyly behind her skirts. "We've taken her in temporarily, but with our 6 already." She looked meaningfully at Katrina and Isaac. Katrina knelt to the child's level, her heart aching for the loss she saw reflected in those serious eyes. "Hello, Ruth. Would you like to see our new lambs? They were just born yesterday." A flicker of interest crossed the girl's face, and she nodded hesitantly. As Isaac led Ruth to the small pen where the lambs frolicked, Katrina turned to Abigail. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Abigail squeezed her hand. "I've seen how you are with my children, Katrina. And Isaac, well, he's a natural father if ever I saw one. Ruth needs a home with love, not just charity." Katrina watched as Isaac gently lifted Ruth to see over the fence, the child's initial reserve melting as a lamb nuzzled her hand. "We've never discussed adoption," Katrina said, the word both terrifying and exhilarating. "Perhaps it's time you did," Abigail replied simply. That evening, after the Thompsons departed, Katrina and Isaac sat on their porch, the conversation turning inevitably to Ruth. "She's a sweet child," Isaac observed. "Smart, too. Did you see how quickly she learned to feed the lambs?" "I did." Katrina took a deep breath. "Isaac, what would you think about Ruth staying with us, not just for a visit, but permanently?" Isaac's expression grew serious. "Are you asking if I'd want to adopt her?" "I know we've never really discussed children since—" "Katrina," he interrupted gently, taking her hands in his. "From the moment I told you I'd fill your life instead of your cradle, I meant it. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't welcome children into our home, however they come to us." Hope blossomed in Katrina's chest. "You'd want Ruth?" "I'd want any child we could give a loving home to," he said simply. "But yes, Ruth especially. There's something about her, a strength beneath the sadness. She reminds me of someone else I admire greatly." Katrina leaned into his embrace, tears of joy spilling onto his shoulder. "Do you think she'd want us? As her parents?" "Only one way to find out," Isaac murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "But I think a child who's lost everything might recognize what we can offer, not just a home, but understanding. Both of us know something about starting over." 2 weeks later, Ruth Prescott Zimmerman moved into the newly finished bedroom in their expanded home. The adjustment wasn't always smooth. Nightmares plagued the child, and there were days of tearful grief for her lost parents. But there were also moments of pure joy. Ruth's first smile at the breakfast table, her delight when Isaac taught her to ride the gentle mare he'd bought specifically for her, and the evening Katrina found them both asleep in the rocking chair, a storybook open across Isaac's lap. By Christmas, Ruth had begun to call them Mama and Papa, the words still tentative but growing more confident with each passing day. And when spring came again, Katrina discovered something she had never expected at 30. She was with child. "How?" she whispered to Isaac when the doctor confirmed what her body had already told her. After all these years of believing it impossible, Isaac gathered her close, his joy radiating like sunlight. "Perhaps some seeds just need the right soil and season to take root. Or perhaps," Katrina suggested, thinking of Ruth, who was now happily settled in school, "our family was already growing in ways we didn't expect, and this is just another blessing we didn't think to ask for." In September, as harvest time approached, Katrina gave birth to a healthy boy they named Thomas Isaac Zimmerman. Ruth, now 7, took her role as big sister with solemn responsibility, proudly helping to rock the cradle that had stood empty for so long. One evening, as the first autumn leaves began to fall, Katrina sat on the porch nursing the baby while Isaac and Ruth built a small fort from twigs in the yard. The sound of their laughter carried on the crisp air, mingling with the baby's contented noises. Mrs. Holloway and Mrs. Fleming happened to be passing by on their way from a church meeting. They paused at the gate, taking in the domestic scene with undisguised curiosity. "Evening, ladies," Isaac called, tipping his hat without pausing in his play with Ruth. "Mr. Zimmerman, Mrs. Zimmerman," Mrs. Holloway replied, her tone suggesting she was still adjusting to Katrina's new name. "Your family is looking well." "Very well indeed," Mrs. Fleming added, her gaze lingering on the baby at Katrina's breast. "Such a blessing after so long." Katrina recognized the familiar note in her voice, the same mixture of surprise and judgment that had once cut her to the quick. But now, surrounded by the family she'd created through love and courage rather than convention, she found the words held no power to wound. "Every day is a blessing," Katrina agreed serenely. "Some just arrive in ways we don't expect." As the women continued on their way, Isaac approached the porch, Ruth's small hand clasped in his. "Still talking about us?" he asked, settling beside her on the swing. "Always," Katrina smiled, shifting the baby so Ruth could climb up between them. "But I find I don't mind anymore." Isaac's arm encircled her shoulders, drawing their family close as the setting sun painted the prairie gold. "They mocked you for your empty cradle," he said softly. "But look what we've filled our lives with instead." Katrina gazed at Ruth's bright face, felt her son's weight against her heart, and leaned into her husband's steady strength. Something far greater than I ever dared to hope for, she whispered, a family built on choice rather than chance. As twilight deepened, the first stars appeared in the velvet sky. Inside the house that had once echoed with loneliness, lamps glowed with welcoming light. The cradle in the corner no longer stood as a symbol of what Katrina lacked, but merely as one piece of a home filled with the many shapes love could take. And as Isaac gathered sleeping Ruth in his arms to carry her to bed, Katrina followed with their son, knowing with bone-deep certainty that sometimes the most precious gifts came not from fulfilling society's expectations, but from having the courage to create a different path altogether. In the years that followed, the Zimmerman homestead grew and flourished. Isaac's skilled management transformed the modest property into one of the most prosperous small farms in the county. They added a second son 2 years after Thomas, a dark-haired boy they named William after Isaac's father. Ruth blossomed under their care, growing into a confident young woman with her mother's strength and her father's gentle heart. She showed a remarkable talent for working with animals, eventually starting a small horse breeding operation with Isaac's guidance. The town's attitude toward Katrina gradually shifted from judgment to respect as the Zimmermans became integral members of the community. Isaac served on the town council, while Katrina helped establish Riversbend's first proper school, ensuring Ruth and her brothers received an education far superior to what frontier children typically expected. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the same porch where they had first acknowledged their feelings, Katrina rested her head on Isaac's shoulder, watching their children play in the yard that was now bordered by white roses she'd planted years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Stopping here instead of continuing your wandering ways?" Isaac's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Not for a single moment," he replied, his voice still carrying the same certainty it had that night under the stars. "Some men spend their whole lives searching for what I found the day I rode up to your gate." Katrina smiled, thinking of how far they had come from those first tentative days. She, a widow, mocked for her empty cradle. He, a drifter seeking a place to belong. "We built something beautiful, didn't we?" "We're still building," Isaac said, watching as Ruth taught little William to catch fireflies in the gathering dusk. "And that's the greatest gift of all." In the soft glow of twilight, with the sounds of their children's laughter carrying on the prairie breeze, Katrina felt the fullness of a life well lived, not measured by society's narrow expectations, but by the love that had transformed an empty house into a home where every heart, once lonely, now beat in harmony with the others. And as Isaac's lips found hers in a kiss still sweet with promise after all these years, Katrina knew that sometimes the greatest journeys weren't those that covered vast distances, but those that led two souls to find in each other exactly what they needed to become whole.